in a French prison cell in 1794. Thomas Paine began writing a book called The Age of Reason, being an investigation of true and fabulous theology. This was fabulous in the old sense, meaning gaudy with too much costume jewelry. Actually, I guess it still means that. In it, he wrote, "The whimsical account of creation, the strange story of Eve, the snake, and the apple, and the Christian system of arithmetic that 3 are 1 and 1 is 3, are all irreconcilable, not only to the divine gift of reason that God has given to man, but to the knowledge that man gains from the power and wisdom of God by the aid of the sciences and studying the structure of the universe that God has made." Elsewhere, he puts it more concisely. "Do we want to know what God is? Search not the book called Scripture, which any human hand might make, but search the Scripture called creation." Thomas Paine here gives us the essence of that period called the Great Enlightenment. Note that he doesn't say he wants science to destroy God. Rather, he hopes that science will rescue God from what he considers faulty human reports. How do you know the Creator? An Enlightenment thinker would have answered by studying the creation. This was an age of reason indeed, an age of science for the 10 rich men in the world who could afford to read each other's books. Everyone else was still living in the Dark Ages. But if you think that these Enlightenment thinkers wanted to drag God through the mud and expose him as a fraud, undeceive yourself. While the church had just tortured and burned thousands of old ladies in the name of Christian mercy, while ministers preached fiery sermons about God breaking the laws of physics and destroying the world out of love, a handful of people said, "Stay thy tongue a moment." And their fabulous wealth made them flame retardant. They said that God was perfect. But this created a real problem for the church. During the Enlightenment, certain people studied the order of the natural world, the workings of the cosmos, and the ticking of their pocket watches, and began to think of God's creation like a giant, perfect clock. Now, there's nothing wrong with thinking that God's creation runs perfectly like clockwork until you open the Bible. When you read about General Joshua in the middle of a bloodbath, wishing for just a few more hours of daylight to make sure his army had butchered absolutely every man, woman, child, donkey, and ox. In Joshua 10, 12 to 14, we read that Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon." And the sun stood still, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. The sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set for a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded a human voice and the Lord fought for Israel. Now, never mind for a moment all that sacred slaughter. The sun stood still. What kind of perfect clock was this? If the clockmaker had to break the clock in order for it to tell time correctly, then the clock was flawed to begin with. If God had to break the laws of physics, laws that God had created, in order for the world to function properly. What a mess. What a mess. This is only one example. Every miracle story in the Bible carries the implication that God's creation could not function properly without the Creator constantly on hand to fix it. And if your pocket watch required you to have the manufacturer with you at all times to keep it running, you would soon find yourself feeling the way I feel about Apple computers. Which in all honesty should have been called lemon computers because they always break down. This isn't perfect. This is garbage. So these thinkers began to reject miracle stories in order to spare God from the scandal of having created a broken clock. Disregard the deus ex machina of God showing up to set things right. Look at how God's machine actually works. Forget the propaganda. Look at the product. Witness how God's creation functions perfectly without divine intervention. Why would a divine manufacturer need to offer a parts and service warranty anyway? Again, this was not an attempt to destroy God, but to rescue God's reputation. But God's professional publicity agents had different ideas. Their reputations were on the line as well. And this, about 200 years ago, is how the discord between religion and science began. We could call it science friction. Hey, you know, I live for the puns. I can't help it. Religion and science have not always been enemies. Throughout millions of years of human history, they were considered the same thing, developing side by side. This was easier when religion was handed down by word of mouth, easily adaptable in case of new scientific or technological developments. Sacred knowledge and history used to be malleable. We could even say that religion is subject to the laws of evolution and natural selection. What doesn't work withers away. And what works remains for a time. Then the situation changes, and religion either changes with the time or withers away. It's never complete. This gets a lot more complicated when you write your sacred stories down. They can't adapt anymore. Writing down a creation story was one of the worst mistakes a religion ever made. Religious stories are written to end debates. But cultural and technological development continue. New debates begin, and a story that cannot adapt may someday find itself obsolete. Why, anyway, should we continue looking to religious stories of creation now that we've got science to tell us what really happened? Well, for one thing, science actually doesn't produce facts, only theories. And they're always changing. Look at a science textbook from the 1900s. Look at Pluto. And the best theory of origin science has yet produced sounds like something an exasperated parent would say to a nagging 3-year-old who kept asking, how is the universe made? How is the universe made? How is the universe made? A big bang, all right? There was a big bang. Now, leave me alone or there's going to be another big bang between my foot and your backside. And the Big Bang Theory, by the way, actually comes from a Roman Catholic priest. But to say that science has not come up with something more convincing than religion doesn't mean that it never will. And it's an unsatisfying answer anyway. Let's go back to the books. According to a biology textbook, the meaning of life is to eat food, reproduce, create fertilizer, and become fertilizer in order to produce more food. But a person who eats, shoots, and leaves a trail of feces might find himself feeling unfulfilled in some way. These are biological imperatives, necessary for the continuance of our genes and species, but they can hardly satisfy that basic human need for deeper meaning in life. When we read a religious creation story, any religion, our inquiring minds will want to know who, what, when, where, how. But these are like Christmas tree ornaments, tacky and flimsy, more fun for children than adults. Forget the ornaments. Look deeper and you will see the tree itself, the most important question. Why? Why was the world created? And how are we supposed to fit in? Besides eating food and making babies and fertilizer, what do our lives mean? And that's a frontier we cannot see with telescopes, cannot dissect with scalpels. We cannot chart and pin to a wall. That is a frontier that we can only explore by faith. Thank you.